Hello, everybody. I am Markos Moulitsas. I am the founder of Daily Kos, and this is our new weekly show about politics. We call it Daily Kos is the Brief. I am your co-host along with Kerry Eleveld. She is a senior political writer at Daily Kos, was once in the press room in the White House, just all around political, amazing person. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be talking today about the state of the presidential election, which everybody wants to talk about. We got a debate coming up. What is the current state of the race, and what might change those dynamics in these few remaining weeks left of this election cycle? We're also going to be joined by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. She represents the Seattle area. She is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, an all-around amazing woman. And we're also going to be joined by Matt Hildreth. He's the executive director of ruralorganizing.org. He's going to be talking about why rural votes matter, even if you might not care about rural voters. We got burned in 2016. We're a little bitter still, but we're going to talk about why they actually do matter. So thank you for joining.
We should care about them. We need to care about them. I mean, I do care about them, just in general.
We should care about everybody.
That's right.
Because that's how you build a winning coalition, of course. So let's get started with the state of the presidential election. Kerry, you and I think, both have very similar views about the state of the race. Basically, we've been writing for, I think, the whole year, if not since last year, that Donald Trump is losing. And once we got Joe Biden as our nominee, then we started writing about how Joe Biden is winning. Now, I know liberals don't like to hear that. Every time I say that, I write that, I can just feel that disturbance in the force, right? You feel liberals just scrunch up in agony because 2016 is still too soon. No one wants to relive that again.
We were all burned. We were all burned.
They don't want to hear that we're losing either, right?
Yeah, no.
They don't want to hear.
Well, I mean, the big disappointment here for me, Markos, is that you and I basically agree with most of mainstream media on this, right? So, which is Biden is winning. The fundamentals of this race, as far as I can tell, and you know the polling, we look at a lot of the same polling. You even go more in depth than I do, but you know, it hasn't changed that much. It's tightened a little bit. You know, Biden doesn't quite have the sort of gaudy leads that he did in the summer, but he has a solid 7 to 9 point lead, depending on which poll you're looking at nationally. He's looking really strong in the battleground states. You know, Democrats are poised to expand the map in places like Georgia and, you know, potentially, right, expand the map. They're at least playing there in places like Georgia and Iowa, which certainly wasn't on the map, the battleground map to begin with. And Arizona is looking like a real possibility. In the meantime, Biden's, you know, holding forth and doing really well in the states that just barely nudged Trump over the top in 2016 by 78,000 votes in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So, you know, he's doing really well, particularly with white voters in those states, which matters quite a bit because they're a larger portion of the vote. And then also because of the changing demographics in the Sun Belt, you know, like Georgia and Arizona and Florida and whatever, there's real possibilities for Democrats there. So he's playing offense almost everywhere.
And so people understand just how dominant Joe Biden's lead is right now. Basically 3 states are going to decide this election: Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Anything beyond that is gravy. If Biden wins Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, he has 278 electoral votes. He's won the election. So in all 3 of those states, Joe Biden right now has a lead of 7 points or bigger. And in fact, we're seeing new polling come out. Pennsylvania came out yesterday. Quinnipiac, or maybe it was last night, had Biden up by 9. And that's with a likely voter screen, right? So put it this way. Biden is closer to Trump in places like South Carolina, Montana, Alaska, and Texas than Trump is to Biden in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. and Michigan. So it's really hard to see how Biden blows this at this point. And the question doesn't become it's no longer is Biden going to win? It's how can we maximize the margin of victory so that we can pull in House seats and Senate seats that are right on the margin in places like Kansas and South Carolina and Montana, Alaska. Not that we're going to win those states, and maybe we will. Maybe we will pull off Alaska, which may be the sleeper state of the cycle. The question is, can we make it close enough? Is the margin closing? And Kerry, you talked about white voters, and I think particularly what we've seen is suburban white women have driven a big part of that change, correct?
Well, absolutely. And that is a continuation. That's not new this cycle, of course, because that's what delivered 41, totally historic 41
38
seats.
Yeah, 38 of the 41 seats were suburban seats that
right,
the
38
House,
of the 41
that the Democrats picked up in the House last cycle.
Suburban seats, and that's what drove that totally historic win, which on election night, we should remember this. We need to remember this, right? On election night, pundits were like, I don't know, it wasn't really a blue wave, it was just sort of a a little bit of a bump or whatever they were saying. They were dead wrong, right? Because we didn't know the extent of the wave, which was pretty amazing on election night. And within the next few days, it became very clear that 41 seats was the most seats we'd won since the 70s. So that was a huge night, and we have to remember that on election night too. That it may not be entirely clear all that's happened on election night. I'm personally hoping against hope that we have something definitive on the presidential race, but we might not. And given how many mail-in ballots there are and what the hurdles are to counting them and all that, we may very well be waiting for several days to have something really decisive. So voters should not be surprised about that. No one in the American public should be surprised if that happens.
Yeah. Now,
sorry.
No, sorry.
I just got on my soapbox.
A lot of people, this is our soapbox. This is literally, maybe not literally, but it is our virtual soapbox. So, you talk about the polls and you say Biden is winning, and people say, yeah, but Hillary Clinton was winning too. And I think it's important for people to realize that Hillary was only winning by 2-3 points in those national polls. And she won the election by 2 points, right? So the national polling was actually accurate. It was in the margins in some of these upper Midwest states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, that the race was lost. So you're not seeing these razor thin margins this year. You're seeing actually these big Biden leads. So the question then becomes, can Trump do anything to reverse those numbers? And that's a big question. There's 5 weeks left. There's 3 debates, including one tonight. And is there anything Trump can do? And my operating theory, Kerry, is that he can't. And that you're going to see hundreds of millions of dollars of TV ads that aren't going to change anybody's mind. You're going to see all sorts of, is the tax story going to change numbers? Whatever other scandals come out, because there's like another 10 on tap for the next 10 days, right?
I mean,
Donald Trump.
For the last 3 weeks, he's been battling nothing but bad news, right? First it was his insult to people who serve in the military, and then it was him admitting on tape to Bob Woodward that he just decided not to tell the American people how dangerous this pandemic was going to be, and then you have the tax story come out. But I beyond those stories, which of course are hard to predict. Except that they will come, right? We can predict that they will come. We just don't know exactly what they're going to be on. But I agree with you that his ability to sort of change the dynamic at this point is almost impossible, because he so needs the adulation of and praise of his voters, and they so need to hear him, do things like lock her up and all this crazy stuff that he spews. Sometimes you get to certain portions of a stump speech and you still wonder if Hillary Clinton is running, and but he needs that adulation, and there's no way for him to be that guy, which he needs to be because he needs to feed his ego, and then also appeal to these, sort of white suburban voters in particular, and not to overemphasize them over people of color, but people of color, and particularly female people of color, are like the Democratic bases. They're the Democrats' most loyal voting
they're
base.
fired up, and every indication is they're going to vote in record numbers.
They are in formation, as Joy Reid said from MSNBC. They are in formation for this ticket, and I was like, that is exactly right. So I just don't think that Trump personally has any ability to shift this on his own as a candidate, and he also now doesn't have the financial resources for his campaign to go and try to micro target, or I mean they're going to cause a bunch of misinformation, disinformation. They're going to spew a bunch of that digitally, but they can't make up for him in terms of TV advertising, right? They can't clean up what his message is by just dominating the airwaves, because they're broke, which you know about and have written about.
So the fact that Donald Trump is unpopular, and he's been steadily unpopular the entirety of his presidential term, it's not a disqualifier. It does not prevent a candidate from winning re-election. We saw this in 2004 with George W. Bush, who was supremely unpopular because of the Iraq War, for messing that up. And so when he started his re-election campaign, it wasn't about trying to sell himself or try to justify his actions. What he did is he set out to make John Kerry more unpopular than he was. And so you got the mocking him over the Purple Heart in Vietnam. Remember when he was a windsurfer, and that was supposed to be so disqualifying that he was a windsurfer. But they pulled it off, right? The right-wing machine, when they are focused on a single message, has incredible ability to create stories out of absolute nonsense. And Hillary's email is the most recent exhibit of that power. So you enter Trump, right? And he's not popular. I don't think anybody can say, Mr. President, you're not popular, therefore let's focus on Joe Biden. Like that would not enter in his mind. He wouldn't let anybody say that to him in the first place. He thinks he's popular. But beyond that, if you look at their efforts to make Joe Biden unpopular, right? There's Hunter Biden, which I'm not sure how that was supposed to hurt Joe Biden, even if it was true. Was true. There's the Obamagate, which was the biggest scandal in the history of America, which lasted all of 2 or 3 days before Trump got bored of that. There is Sleepy Joe, but maybe it's 45 years of practice, so he's a great debater Joe, but no, he's Sleepy Joe, and maybe he's on drugs Joe. I mean, he cannot even focus on a single line of attack. So you have this vast right-wing machine that's so used to like zeroing in on the biggest piece of nonsense, they don't know what to do.
I think part of the problem is that this disinformation campaign that the right wing feeds off of, right? I mean, and let's be real, there's like at least 30 to 35% of voters who buy into this crap, and they'll buy into it no matter what it was, no matter what it is, whether it's about a pedophilia ring or whatever. I mean, this is just crazy stuff, and they're like, oh yeah, I totally believe that. But the problem is that I think that we've had 4 years of peeling back the layers of Trump, his supposed win in 2016. I mean, I always wonder if 10 years down the road we're going to find out something wasn't quite right about that. I mean, a lot of people, I personally wonder about that, right? But but I think people have seen that there's just lie after lie after lie coming out of this administration. Not this 35% of voters, maybe not even 40% of voters. I don't know, like our two-party system has produced a situation where any major party nominee typically gets 40% no matter what.
Historically, going back a century.
Historically, right? Going back a century. So you can pretty much just go ahead and start at a baseline of 40% and assume that Trump's going to get right around 40%. The question is, does he fall a little bit below that, or does he get a couple points above it, or by how much, right? So, but but the rest of the population, which is, I think, a lot more savvy than it was in 2016 about the efforts by Russia, the disinformation campaign, all of these conspiracy theories and whatever. They're not nearly as susceptible to the right trying to drive up, to Republicans trying to drive up and fabricate some big scandal. So for instance, right? So we peeled back the layer on Trump because there was a whistleblower who called Trump on the carpet for trying to force Ukraine and Ukrainian officials into launching a completely bogus probe on Joe Biden, right? Which was baseless. And it had been determined baseless even by the Ukrainians themselves, along with a lot of reporting, a mountain of reporting on it. And so you peel back the layer on that, and then you have Senator Ron Johnson, GOP Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, trying
of Moscow.
Yeah, right.
Our Moscow.
Right. A useful idiot, right? Trying to recreate, give Trump the probe that Ukraine actually was never willing to announce. And it drops, and it just drops flat. He puts out this report from the Senate, and through a lot of work by the Democrats to uncover the fact, and also some statements by the FBI and things like that to uncover the fact that much of this information is being supplied by actually Russian intelligence, right? So when that comes out, it falls flat. And one of the reasons it falls flat is because voters are no longer, willing to just buy into the latest sensationalist thing they see, trumped up charge against so-and-so, or in this case against Biden. Last cycle, it was Hillary Clinton. And so there's sort of a nerd to this, right? And I think that has made the right-wing conspiracy theories very, very viral among a 35%-ish amount of the population, but not at all getting no traction, almost zero traction among another 60% of the population.
They get more and more outlandish, right? Because they have to one up that outrage meter. And you're not gonna make it in conservative media by being reality based. It's just not gonna work for you. Nobody's managed that. So there's one little factoid that I want to close the segment with before we get to our guests. The 200,000 people have died because of this global pandemic in the United States. A big chunk of that because of Donald Trump's incompetence. And we could have a whole show on what if Hillary Clinton had been president and only 10,000 people had died. What would this election look like? And we all know the answer to that. But 200,000 dead in Donald Trump's favorability ratings, his job approval ratings. Civics, the polling firm Civics tracks his polling numbers every single day, his approval numbers. 200,000 people have died. It has cost him a net 3 points of support. 3 points of support. That's all 200,000 people. So it shows you how difficult it is to move public opinion, particularly as polarized as we are now. I don't see any sort of information that could come out that would dramatically change people's perception. Now, there's questions about who turns out, who has the better get out the vote machine, who's more motivated to vote. Is Trump going to try to steal the election once the results are in? There's all these questions, right? But if you're looking at just people's public opinion, I don't think it's going to change. So with that, let's get to our guests. We pre-recorded these interviews last week. So if you want to see the full interview, you can go to Daily Kos YouTube channel. We have the full interviews there. For our purposes here today, we're going to pull in some key segments from those interviews. And first up is Seattle area Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. She is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She is the first Indian American woman in Congress, which still sort of blows my mind that we had these first that shouldn't really be first this late in history, basically. So when we talked to her last week, there's always so much happening, right? At the time, we wanted to really kind of focus on something substantive. So we talked about climate change. That is obviously very salient since here in California, we're burning. The whole West Coast is burning. You had Iowa.
We're both
Yeah.
based in California,
Yeah.
so we've seen in Northern California. So we've seen a lot of this, the smoke and the fires, and we've been watching it burn up through Oregon and Washington too. So anyway,
Right.
go ahead.
You have the hurricanes in the Gulf. You have Iowa having these 100-year floods that are happening like every year.
Yeah.
These are not 100-year floods anymore. These are seasonal, I guess. So anyway, we talked to the Congresswoman about climate change. And the question I had was that obviously progressives got really excited about the Green New Deal and have been pushing Democrats to adopt the Green New Deal. And Joe Biden was asked about the Green New Deal at a CNN town hall about a week or two ago. And Joe Biden said, no, I haven't signed on to the Green New Deal. I have my own climate plan. So we asked Congresswoman Jayapal why progressives should get excited about Joe Biden's climate plan. So let's go to the tape.
Joe Biden does have one of the most progressive plans that a presidential campaign has put forward in a long time. And that is in part thanks to the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force. His plan says we're going to get to 100% renewable energy by 2050. That is not as quickly as some of us would like. But he also says an emissions-free power sector by 2035. That was something that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others helped negotiate as part of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on Climate. And I think that those two pieces are very important, combined with a third piece, which is that 40% of all the expenditures made, all the resources that are put forward towards addressing climate change will go to frontline communities and those most disproportionately affected. Markos, as you know, the burden of climate change is falling on Black and Brown and Indigenous people here in the United States and across the country. And we need to know that attacking climate change is actually bringing about climate justice. So jobs, justice, and decarbonization are sort of the three elements. And the Biden plan, while of course doesn't go as far as some of us would like to see, is absolutely a giant step in the right direction. And let's just be clear. Our two choices here are Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has made it clear that he is going to do everything possible to not address climate change and, in fact, to take us backwards. So we are excited about what we've gotten, but we're never going to stop pushing for, even faster action as we move forward. And, I just want to remind people that when John McCain was running for president quite some time ago, he actually had a very aggressive climate plan. And then the fossil fuel lobbyists got in the way and all of a sudden convinced the Republican Party to act like climate change wasn't real, that the science wasn't real. And unfortunately, that has happened in our party as well with Democrats. We've had not enough energy, no pun intended, directed at really taking on those fossil fuel companies and at the same time creating a sensibility where workers who are working in the fossil fuel industry, those are good union jobs, but they're just in a terrible industry. We have got to figure out also how to transition those jobs to good union jobs in the renewable energy sector, but also in the places where those jobs need to be replaced. And that's one of the hardest things that we have found here in Washington State is how do you not just replace the number of jobs, but how do you get jobs in the right places? I think that the wildfires, and I'm sitting here in Seattle, Washington, the smoke was just horrendous, as you know, California, Oregon. And then, as you said, the flooding, which already had brought some Republicans on board in the South. I think that has created the beginnings, not the end, but the beginnings of a tipping point where it is just clear that we do not have time left. We actually didn't have time left 10 years ago. And we've got to do everything we can as quickly as we can. And hopefully both Democrats and Republicans are ready to take that kind of bold action in the face of all the money that's going to come to try to stop us.
So, Kerry, a couple of things struck me there. One is she recognized that Democrats have been part of the problem. They have been sort of captivated by fossil fuel industries. And you see this in particular in places in the South, Southern Democrats and Plain State Democrats that represent districts with big energy industries. And that's been a problem. But also, she suggested that there are Republicans coming aboard and that, yeah, after John McCain, they abandoned the pursuit of climate change, but that maybe they're ready to come back. In fact, a lot of the states being hit hard right now, again, are in the flooding, are those Republican heavy rural areas in the Midwest. I guess we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but rural areas that are being hit, as well as southern states bordering the Gulf region. Do you feel that optimism that maybe Republicans are going to take this seriously?
I always feel optimism. I can't, it's just, what can I say? I'm an optimistic gal. So anyway, but yeah, no, I mean, look, this is why, I mean, as cynical as it is, Donald Trump went down to Florida a couple weeks ago and declared himself a great environmentalist, quote unquote, right? When he signed some sort of flimsy thing about, not scaling back drilling, off the shores of the Gulf of Mexico or something like that. I can't remember the exact, but it wasn't a bold move by any means. And on top of that, he spent his entire presidency, cutting regulations for all his fossil fuel buddies so that they could get into every nook and cranny and every offshore drilling scheme that they possibly could. But this was popular in Florida, which we know is, Florida is always, in terms of, it's a heartbreaker many, many years, every year for Democrats, but it's always right on the margins, right? It's always right on the margins. And the fact that he thought and his campaign thought it was a good idea for him to go down and lie to Floridians and the rest of the nation about the fact that he's the preposterous notion that he's a great environmentalist is a piece of what, the representative is talking about there, right? And I do think what happens is that eventually the reality of what's happening in people's day-to-day lives overcomes what the bunch of BS they're being sold by the Republican Party, and that is, I think that is starting to happen in some of those Gulf Coast regions. It's starting to happen maybe in parts of Tornado Alley. It's certainly, the West is pretty Democratic, pretty pro-Democratic, but it's really clear to people who are living here that we're seeing climate disruption, right? We're no longer telling the climate where we're going to live. The planet is telling us where we get to live. And, that is happening more and more. Anyway,
it does feel like something has changed. Like some line has crossed in the last 6 months.
I don't know how long have you lived here?
Since 2000, so 20 years.
So I've lived here just a little bit. I've lived here a shorter time than that, for 8 years or so. And in that 8 years, the last 3 years of smoke issues dealing with the fires and whatever have just gone up exponentially. The fires, fortunately, we haven't confronted a fire, but many regions close to us, many locales close to us have. And it's clear, even just within a handful of years, what a different situation we're looking at. Anyway, so I got off track a little bit.
No problem.
That's how I do.
One of the things we talked about with the Congresswoman, I'll let you be a little more optimistic. I'm very pessimistic about Republicans, at least in their current version of Republicanism. So
I agree with you. I'm talking a little bit down the line. And
people.
The problem is, right. The problem is that we don't have time to spare, right?
Right.
We just don't have time to spare. So sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I think there's more urgency. But one of the things that I enjoyed talking to Congresswoman about was she was elected in 2016, got into office in 2017 in a Republican House, in the minority. And then in 2018, Democrats won their wave year. And then she's been in the majority for the last 2 years. So she's gotten a good taste of the before and after. And so we asked her about that. So let's hear her answer.
Oh my God, it is such a difference. I still remember being on the Judiciary Committee, and I was sitting right next to my colleague, Jamie Raskin, who had been the Senate Majority Leader in Maryland before coming to Congress. And we were getting amendment after amendment turned down, not even listened to. And he turns to me and he says, "This sucks." And I said, yes, this is why majorities matter, because you look at the 9 bills, typically HR 1 through HR 9 are the priorities of whatever house is in power. And you look at those 9 bills, HR 1, democracy reform, getting money out of politics, the HR 6, the Dream and Promise Act, HR 2, moving forward on infrastructure, getting a green jobs infrastructure package, real investment across the country. You can go through paycheck fairness, so that women everywhere can earn what men make. I mean, these are critically important priorities, and the House has passed all of them. The House passed a $15 minimum wage bill, which just 10 years ago, we couldn't even get the Democratic Party.
That was crazy, right? That was crazy talk.
I know. And so, you look at what we've been able to accomplish in a Democratic House, and that gives you the floor of what we can accomplish with the majority.
So, we're going along with the show. This is our first time. We're still working out timing and everything. So there's a lot more in that interview that you should check out, again, at the Daily Kos YouTube channel. But in that one clip, I do want to point out one really interesting idea, and that's the idea that the Democratic House, is giving us the floor of what is possible. We don't have to guess at what a Democratic majority, Democratic governance might look like. They have showed us. They've created this floor. We're talking about $15 minimum wage and climate change legislation and so on. And so to us, I think it's imperative to work to fight for that more progressive Congress, that more progressive Senate, because if we take solid majorities in the Senate, we're talking about statehood for DC. We're talking about potential statehood for Puerto Rico if its residents want it. We're talking about expansion of the Supreme Court and the appellate courts that have been stacked by Republicans in the last few years. And so there's so much that we can do. And already we talk about a floor, and that's just the starting point. There's so much more that we can accomplish beyond that, right?
The thing that really summed it up for me was that picture of Nancy Pelosi looking across when she went to visit the White House. It's that iconic photo of her standing up and pointing her finger at Donald Trump from across the table, right?
So good.
With the generals like hanging their heads down and looking, they're gazing into their laps as she, apparently told him that all roads lead to Russia. And that was just with the change because that never would have happened if Democrats hadn't retaken the House in 2018, right? We never would have had someone who was willing to look Donald Trump in the eye and say, look, you're doing Russia's dirty work, and I'm not going to stand for it, and I'm walking out of this meeting. And, that is the difference. I mean, so she's served as sort of, a block to many of the things that Republicans would have done if they could have. Now we have the opportunity to get the rest of the job done, which is to take back the White House and hopefully take back the Senate, and then not just be a block to the terrible things that Republicans are trying to do, but to actually push forward these progressive issues, this floor, as you're talking about, of issues, right?
So definitely encourage everybody to check out the full interview, because we're leaving so much on the cutting room floor, unfortunately. But Kerry, Democrats obviously win urban areas with huge margins. We're making huge strides in the suburbs. They're becoming more and more Democratic. Rural areas are all rural areas, right? That's tough, right? And if you look at where Donald Trump got his margins in 2016, it was in rural America. You talked to somebody whose job it is to try to do something about. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as you know, I've kept an eye on rural America and trying to make sure that, see if Donald Trump's, terrible policies, particularly with the trade war and the tariffs, the escalating tariffs, started to cut into some of his support in those areas, in small towns and rural communities, and see if some of those voters would become available to Democrats. So I put the question to Matt Hildreth, who's the executive director of ruralorganizing.org. And they're an organization that works to bring a progressive message and policies to these small towns and rural areas. And he said one of the things his organization has been doing is been trying to re-engage some of these Obama voters who voted in 2012 for Obama, voted for him in 2016, but then, in 2008 and 2012, but then sat out 2016 and didn't vote. And they've done some extensive polling on this group of people, particularly in rural areas. 7,000 voters in states like Alaska, Georgia, Iowa, Kansas, Maine, Montana, North Carolina.
There are a lot of Senate races there.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of Senate races, and also Wisconsin, which doesn't have a Senate race, but is obviously a key battleground state. So let's take a listen to what Matt had to say about these voters.
The voters that I'm really interested in are those Obama no-show voters, or the people that voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012 and then didn't show up in 2016. And I think there's a big misconception out there that rural voters rejected Obama. Actually, rural voters were an important piece of the Obama coalition. And so I think that that we do need to be keeping an eye towards those voters that decided to stay home, and didn't feel like there was a Democratic candidate for them, or maybe they thought they didn't need to vote because they thought the election was already decided. So I think that's a really important piece of it as well. I do think that there's more things that progressives could do to be persuasive for rural voters, but I think this election especially, we have to be turning out the base.
Well, sir, that makes sense, though. So if you're trying to re-energize, particularly this group of people that were into Obama, voted for Obama, and then sat out in 2016, right? What do you think are the issues that are sort of most important to this group of voters that really does sort of engage them and bring them back into the fold? Have you had any success thinking about that?
Oh, absolutely. We've done extensive polling all this last year. We did a sample size of over 7,000 Senate battleground voters in rural areas. And far and away, the number one issue right now is COVID. I think there's a misconception in the media that rural people aren't concerned about COVID. They're very much concerned about COVID. And actually, they're much more concerned about COVID spreading at schools and universities than the economic impact from the shutdowns. And I think those state house protests really were effective at convincing the media that rural people were with Donald Trump on COVID. They're not. And also on healthcare. We see this across, all demographics, but especially in rural areas, people are concerned about healthcare. I think that's something we have to really look at with the Supreme Court situation that we're looking at now, that, their healthcare is on the ballot. And we know that in the states where they expanded Medicaid, more rural hospitals were able to stay open. So I think those two issues are the primary place for us to maybe win over some people that aren't used to voting for Democrats. But also, I think another thing that we really have to be focused on is antitrust, breaking up monopolies. We see that in small towns and rural communities across the country, whether we're talking about dollar stores or Walmart or the agricultural industry. That corporate consolidation is really hurting small towns and rural areas. And rural voters know that. And in fact, some of the things they like most about Donald Trump is his anti-corporate, his anti-corruption rhetoric. And I think sometimes they're actually not hearing that from Democrats.
So some pretty interesting stuff there. I know you're, I see that quizzical look on your face. So it's a huge tell. I knew.
None of that is offensive to any progressives.
Well,
None of that.
That's the point. That's the point. And I think part of what's interesting there is, gosh, it turns out COVID is like a number one issue for rural voters. Whoa, there you go. It seems
COVID is the only
basic,
thing,
right?
Right. It's the only thing that has moved numbers, and maybe only 3 points. But again, so many of these races are going to be razor thin that we need every point we can claw back across the entire electorate, including rural areas that we're going to lose otherwise, correct?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is that Hildreth told me was that, their motto, which doesn't sound particularly inspiring, but I'm going to give it a little context, is lose less. Okay. So their organizing motto in rural communities is lose less. And the point is not, not don't get out there and try. The point is to have a realistic goal, which is we're not going to get out there and be able to like get in majorities of rural voters right now at this particular stage in our political environment to vote Democratic. But if we can work on the margins, which because the messaging is that the issues are there, right? The issues of surrounding healthcare are there. In places where states that haven't expanded, didn't do the Medicare expansion that was offered by Obamacare, right? More rural hospitals have closed in those areas, so rural voters are very aware of this. Anyway, these are some issues that are right for Democrats to really press forward on, because that's what we stand for. I mean, that's a big part of our agenda, right? And so he was saying that like we're not going to win over majorities necessarily, but we can work on the margins and we can reduce how many. Something about the Republican branding is so strong in these rural areas that they're still prone to voting for Republicans, even if a lot of the policy leaning is towards the Democrats. So
racism and sexism, we still got to deal with that.
Well, Matt was saying there's even 20% of one of the misconceptions about rural voters is that they're all white.
True.
He said there's 20% of these voters that are actually people of color.
And Democrats do nothing to turn them out, right? Because the entire turnout machine is in the cities.
And that's what he's talking about too, right? It's turning out these voters that didn't vote in 2016, rather than trying to do necessarily a whole conversion effort.
Right.
But that is possible in the future. The other thing he talked about, and we'll hit this real quick, is these Sherrod Brown voters. His organization is based in Ohio. Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown continues to win over and over.
Easily, not even close.
Easily, not even close. He wins re-election at the same time that Republicans are winning, things like presidential races and and gubernatorial races. So these voters are actually ticket splitting. Let's take a look at that real quick.
The people talked about the Donald Trump, Barack Obama voter, but I'm interested in the Sherrod Brown Donald Trump voter, and who are these voters that are out there? And a lot of them feel like the Democrats walked away from their communities. And a lot of that has to do with Democrats chasing a corporate agenda, frankly, to be, critical of the Democrats. And so if we're going to stand up for workers, if we're going to stand up for people of color, this is how we can, I think, build, not just obviously in rural areas, but a coalition that spans rural and urban areas. I think Sherrod Brown has a reputation of being somebody fighting for workers. And I think that is something that is, very personal to him. I think everybody here knows that that's a priority for him. And so there's a constituency of maybe disgruntled union workers or people that have unaddressed grievances. And they said, I was part of the union. I was a Democrat. And what did that ever get me? And frankly, if you look at how Donald Trump ran in Ohio, he had a very racist message, but he also had this message of the forgotten worker. And I don't think that works against somebody like Sherrod Brown. So Sherrod Brown will stand up on progressive issues, but he also has this core that is focusing on people who are doing, physical labor for a living, union workers. And I think that that's something that has carried him across. Sherrod Brown's not trying to run like a Republican, frankly. He's trying to run like a progressive. Yeah, at the beginning of the year, I said there's Joe from Scranton and then there's Joe from DC, and depending on which Joe shows up, I think could have a lot to do with the outcome of the election. I will say the comment that you just mentioned, the comment about not having an Ivy League education, hit me as like very effective with this demographic. I mean, it's kind of like, are we the party of the working people or not? And the working class is the most diverse class in America. And I think that having that message, that race class narrative that incorporates that working class identity is really effective. And I have seen that more from Joe Biden than maybe I would have expected at the beginning of the year. And I think that that's been effective. And I think the next step then is carrying that sort of sentiment into an actual agenda. That's why one of the things that we're really pushing at ruralorganizing.org is this Office of Rural Prosperity. We want a national Office of Rural Prosperity like Governor Kelly has put in Kansas. And I think that if we can tie that sort of working class identity, working class sentiments with an actual agenda that people can see themselves in, I think that's where we're going to really have success.
So we don't have a lot of time left, and we need to wrap this out here pretty soon. But he's right. Joe Biden is using that. He's explicitly using that message, right? He's Joe from Scranton as opposed to Donald Trump from Wall
Right. I
Street.
like to call it the Trump, you can take your golden toilet and shove it, sort of
exactly
like that message from and of course I'm paraphrasing. That's not what Biden says, but anyway, he should, right. So, and I mean, it fits in perfectly with the whole tax thing and everything. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry. So,
yeah, but I was going to say, I'm not sure Hillary didn't talk about that, right? So I still think that there are some undercurrents of racism, sexism that are at play in a lot of America. But having a white man who is talking about these economic themes at the top of the Democratic ticket seems to have realigned Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin where they were originally, which is a pretty solid Democratic majority. And so I'm not happy about what that says about where America is right now. Where are you on that? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, no, I agree. I mean, it should, right. The messenger shouldn't matter, but it does. I mean, that is the bottom line. And I don't think it hurts, of course, that Joe Biden was actually born in Scranton, right? That does give him some cred, and I think that helps. I mean, interestingly, I'm pretty sure Hillary Clinton, was she born in Chicago? She was a Midwesterner originally.
Yes, I believe Chicago.
She either grew up there or she was born there. It's funny how you learn these things and then they escape you like years later. But anyway, you learn an entire biography and then a few years later it's like, woof, it's gone.
Yeah, we can't look up Wikipedia in the middle of this podcast.
But the point is that I do think that gives him some Midwestern cred, and he talks about it a lot. It's not something that Hillary Clinton talked about all that much. And I think that in terms of his messaging and him being the messenger feels authentic. And I think authenticity is worth a heck of a lot for voters, right? For some reason, a lot of voters, and it may have just been pure sexism, it may have been whatever, but a lot of voters didn't feel that they felt that authenticity from Hillary Clinton. I felt it fine. I thought she was very authentic about wanting to do good and being a good public servant. But this authenticity is very important, especially in this election where where Donald Trump is going to spew a million lies, especially tonight at the debates. So anyway, I think that's working well for him.
With that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us. You can subscribe to the Daily Kos channel on YouTube. We're going to be broadcasting every Tuesday, at least through the end of the year, hopefully moving on forward beyond that. And again, thank you so much. This is Daily Kos' weekly show, The Brief. I am Markos Moulitsas with Kerry Eleveld. See you next week.